Anyone recognize what this is? It's a comic. It's Orphan Annie, Little Orphan Annie. And by the way, you wouldn't recognize this unless you're 100 years old. We're going to do something. We're going to do something kind of fun today with Little Orphan Annie. So, as it relates to Galatians, so I need to fill you in on what this strip is about. Little Orphan Annie started as a comic strip in 1924, and in 1924, it turned out that the newspapers were looking for ways to attract readers, and so they were all looking for good comic strips like this. And this guy Harold Gray had been looking. He was an artist and stuff like that. He was walking in downtown Chicago and ran across this little girl whose name was Annie, an orphan, and he was really impressed with her because she was streetwise but lovable. She wasn't nasty and rough around the edges, but she was very capable and winsome. And he thought, wow. And then he thought we could do a comic strip about this. So he started this comic strip with the paper in Chicago, and it was very controversial because at the time, of course, comic strips are for kids and for adults, right? So you have to be able to hit both those camps. But at the time, there were a bunch of comic strips that had as their lead character a boy or a young man. Like a lot of them, none of them had girls. So he decided to have a girl kind of hero strip back in 1924. And made it Little Orphan Annie, based on this girl that he'd met in the streets of Chicago. Most people don't understand, in 1924, about this time, there were a lot of orphans. And the reason for that was because of the Spanish flu. And the Spanish flu, which had been, this is 1924 in this picture, this is in about 1918, 19, and 20, it was like 4 waves of the Spanish flu. But it was different from COVID. For COVID, for us in our experience, COVID was especially dangerous for people who were older, but for children, almost didn't touch them. And the younger you were, the less impacted by it. Spanish flu was different. Spanish flu affected older and very young. So as a result of that, I'm older and middle age, so I'm talking about parents' age, and usually the highest demographic of death during the Spanish flu was between the ages of 20 and 35. They went before everyone else did, and then the older, and then the kids. So as a result of that, in the ages of 20 to 35, you have a lot of young parents. So a lot of young parents died and left a lot of orphans. So by the time you get to 1924, when this was here, orphans were a real deal. They were a real problem in America, and a hard time taking care of that many kids who had no parents. So having a protagonist, hero, young gal who was attractive, who was fun, who was perky, who was plucky is the word they use for Annie all the time, as a hero, this was a good thing because it spelled hope for America about, this next generation. They don't have parents, but, they can figure out how to live life. And if you know the stories about Little Orphan Annie or later Annie, by the way, the Broadway version of Annie will be 50 years old next year. What? Yes. So if you know Annie as a character, Annie was just a wonderful character. She would get involved with gangsters and with bullies, and she was into fixing injustice. And you know how those stories go. She gets adopted by the Warbucks. Right? I was thinking Warfield. Daddy Warbucks. Who Daddy Warbucks made his money from World War I as an arms dealer. Warbucks. That's where he comes. Anyway, we won't get into all that kind of stuff. We're going to look at this. Yeah, you want to say, Doug? From the Spanish flu? Yeah, it was a horrible time. I mean, my parents were both born during that era. They weren't sure that they were going to be born. I mean, the parents. It was a bad time. Bad time. By the way, it's trivia time. We got a couple minutes, right? Do you know why it's called the Spanish flu? This is a very odd thing. Most people don't know this. It's not because it came from Spain, by the way, which is what most people think. It's because during World War I, in 1918 especially, the countries were trying to encourage young men to come and fight, and it turns out the biggest outbreaks of Spanish flu were when they were in training, they were in barracks and stuff like that. So it was devastating, all the new recruits that were coming into the armies, not just the U.S., but in the U.K. and in France. But Spain was neutral, and they were not in the war. And the reason why the Spanish flu got named for Spain was because the Spanish press didn't have a problem advertising the problems of the flu, whereas the Americans and the French and the Brits didn't want to advertise it because they thought it would hurt getting young soldiers in. So that the Spanish guys wrote about it, and so it became the Spanish flu, even though it was everywhere. Okay, what are we doing? Okay, let me just read you this comic strip, because I'm going to take us back to the beginning of Little Orphan Annie, not the end of Little Orphan Annie, the beginning of Little Orphan Annie, while she's still an orphan. So this was 2 months after this strip started in the Chicago Tribune. And so I'll just read these for you. This is the pluckiness she has. So she's in the orphanage. She's not with the Warbucks yet. She's in the orphanage. And the first thing up here says, "Wee, ice cream for dinner." And then this nasty lady, she says, "Yes, but not for you, young lady. I just discovered you failed to make your bed properly this morning, so you will eat mush and milk in the kitchen." And there she is with her mush. "Gee whiskers," which, by the way, was a famous Annie line. "Gee whiskers. Gee whiskers. That doesn't seem fair. We only have ice cream about once a year, and I like it better than anything." And then down here, she's taunted by the other orphans there. "Yeah, mush and milk, mush and milk. Annie slipped on a banana." Yeah. "I ate your ice cream for you." Yeah! Annie didn't get any ice cream. Annie didn't get any. Annie didn't get any. Yeah. You know how kids do that, right? And then down here, "Chase yourselves or you'll get this right in your mush." So she picks up the mush to throw it at her, right? And then the next frame up here, "She's getting mad. She's getting mad. Ooh, Annie plays the grand piano. Oh, can I have some of your nice mush? Yeah. I told you to leave me alone. Scat." This is very much Annie. She's in your face. "Scat, beat it, fan yourselves. If I lose my temper, I'll make you think you were pushed off the Christmas tree." I've never used that one, but I'm going to. Pushed off the Christmas tree. "Gosh all hemlock." That's a very depressing statement. "Gosh all hemlock. As if I didn't have enough trouble, the next brat that pokes his pen in that door meets this whole dish of mush traveling fast." She picks up the scissors. "I knew it. There's a foot. I knew it. There they come. Here's where mush meets mush. Splap! Leaping lizards, it's Miss Asthma." That was the bad lady. "But gee whiskers, Miss Asthma, I didn't know it was you, honest." Little Orphan Annie was the most popular comic strip by the end of that year in 1924. More than Popeye, more than all the other ones that were in the comics. Because this young girl just had this something about her that people just loved. And she ended up being kind of a freedom fighter and a justice fighter with Daddy Warbucks. I mean, she's really a fascinating character. And at the top of many of these, this is a little bit of history for you. At the top of most of the comics, and we know this is a Sunday comic. You know how you can tell? It's in color, right? Color comics were only on Sundays. We used to wait for the newspaper for that. But at the top of the comic strips, there was always what the cartoonists called a topper. And at the topper, it usually had some kind of completely disconnected theme in the topper thing that announced it. And so the topper on this one, it turns out, see, there's the title in the topper. This is a fantasy. This is a fantasy after you read this. It's a fantasy that Annie has about doing justice to the old lady who did that to her. So here's Annie now as a queen. She's on a throne, and she's passing judgment on this old lady who, said, I discovered you didn't make your bed, so you're getting mush and milk. And then she's being held by two soldiers. And here's some of the taunting kids over here. And they say, "At it, kid queen, yeah." And she says right here, "It is my order that she shall eat nothing but prunes and mush for 11 years. So this is her fantasy out of that particular case. So you always wondered, you'd read the topper and think, what is that? Then you'd read the cartoon and go back, oh, I get it. By the way, you know what this woman's name is, the nasty lady? Miss Asthma. Because it's a play on words, because it's very close to the word miasma. And miasma, which is a word none of us use anymore, miasma by definition is a highly unpleasant or unhealthy smell or vapor. Or down here, an oppressive or unpleasant atmosphere which surrounds or emanates from something. I could have used this on my brother all the time. Or it's a thick, corrupting atmosphere of fear or filth. So Harold Gray, who's the author of the strip, decided, let's give her a name like miasma, Miss Asthma, yeah. And she was replaced. She was retired sometime later, and her replacement was another nasty lady, and her name was Miss Treat. Get it? Yeah, see, we're sharp this morning. Yeah. So what we're going to look at as we look at Galatians is kind of flyway. Is the gospel according to Little Orphan Annie? Because he's going to raise some issues in this part of Galatians which fits so perfectly to Little Orphan Annie. Now, not the later Little Orphan Annie where she was actually crusading around the world with Daddy Warbucks to fix injustice everywhere. I mean, she was, as an orphan, she was subject to so much brutality and so much strong-arming by people, and she had to live by her wits to figure out how to do it. She hated bullies. So later in this strip, as it goes on, after she gets adopted by the Warbucks, that she actually goes on crusades around the world to fix things, to fix the injustices of the world. This is Little Orphan Annie. It's a great strip. Actually, many times what would happen was that Annie would leave the house for some reason. For instance, early in the comic strip, it turns out that Annie, who was brought into the household, was actually brought in by Warbucks' wife. I don't know her first name. I can't think of it right now, but brought her in. And then they didn't like each other. So Warbucks' wife was going to stick her back in the orphanage, but because of social pressures, they forced her to bring her back in the house and stuff like that. But during those times when she actually kicked her out of the house, which happened often early in the strip, then Annie would go off and she'd be bullied by people, and then she would bully them back and bring them to justice. What? Yes. And then often she would do it and she would get in trouble because she's not a very powerful girl, but she's really plucky and, strong-headed and stuff like that. And so in the end of almost all the comic strips, as she's dealing with the injustices and the bullies of the world, then Daddy Warbucks would show back from his business trip, and he'd come and he'd save her, and he would do something against the bad guys, and then we'd start all over there the next week. So she would find the problems, she would engage the problems, he would come back because he's powerful and he's an industrialist, and he would fix the problems. He had connections in the justice departments and everything would be right, and he would fix things and be done. And this cycle would go on. That's how the strip kind of worked. She was kind of like the one who would find the injustices in the world, and Daddy Warbucks would fix it. Great stuff. You need that to understand why we're going to do the gospel according to Little Orphan Annie. Okay, so here we go. We're into Galatians. Last time, this is where we left it. We left it in Galatians 3:29. And he said, if you are the Messiahs, that is, you belong to Jesus, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to promise. And that heirs word, an inheritor in a family, that's where we're going today, as Paul kind of expands on that. An heir is someone who's born in a family, and the riches and the treasures of the family are passed down as people die. But you have to be a member of the family for that to work. But he says you are now actually part of that family, Abraham's family, if you belong to Jesus. And so the promises that were given to Abraham, so like 4,000 years ago from our place right now, those promises are actually now coming to you. They come to your doorstep because of what Jesus has done for you. So that's what he's talking about last time. He's going to expand on this idea of an heir, of being in a family where you inherit tremendous riches. Tremendous riches is the promise given to Abraham. And what was that promise? It was that God said to Abraham, you're going to have innumerable people who are going to come out of you, be descendants of you. And those descendants are blessed because I will be their God and they will be my people. So this is the creation of a nation that's centered around God, that many times we think only applies to Israel. But his arguments he did last week and the week before was, no, this does not apply only to Israel. This applies to the entire world, to Gentiles as well. And in fact, he says from here, you are Abraham's offspring. You are Abraham's offspring if indeed you believe, and he talked about that before, and you have this blessing, this promise coming to you. So you're in this favored position. And you're an heir of something, of the promises. So let's kind of build on there, because that's where he's going today in Galatians. So I mean that the heir, I mean that the heir, as long as he's a child, is no different from a slave, though he's the owner of everything. So he's looking at an ancient household. The ancient household had slaves who lived in the house. The children lived in the house, and the children felt like slaves in the house. Oh, do I have to take out the garbage again? Oh, you know, the chores, you know, all this kind of stuff. So he's saying that they look almost identical. They're kind of in the authority of the household, or the father and the mother that's in the household. Children, slaves, both, you know. But the difference is a child has an inheritance. They're the owner of everything eventually, because this inheritance comes. But they look indistinguishable at first. They look like, I've got chores, the slave has chores, we all have chores. We're all under the thumb of the parental authority, which is what we used to call Dorothy's parents. The PA. Yeah, the parental authority. We're all under the thumb of parental authority. We're all children. They're slaves as well. Someday I'll break out of that. They look the same in a way, but the difference is the children have an inheritance coming. They're the owner of everything. So this is what he's getting at about us being heirs because of what we have through Abraham. Verse 2, but he's under guardians, yes, and managers, yes, until the date set by his father. By the way, this guardians idea is something he brought up last time too. He said the law, strangely enough, you'll have to go back and read this, is like a guardian to us. Its task is to mature us, like the guardians did during that time, and then turn us into adults and then operate on your own in a different frame of mind, not a childlike frame of mind, a different frame of mind. And the law was meant to be a guardian to bring us to Christ. That's how it raises us up. So you have to go back and look at that. So that's what he's still saying here. You're under guardians when you're in those age. It's kind of the time of immaturity. But in the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. What? Well, first, the elementary principles of the world, hard to translate into English what that is. The best way and the silliest way is to call it your ABCs. As children, you dealt with simple elementary things. And so the elementary principles. But what he was saying was that what we used to do under the law when we were childish before Christ, what we used to do is we said, well, here's the law. It's a statement of what righteous behavior looks like. So I guess what I got to do this morning is wake up and do more righteous behavior. I got to do the law. If the law says you got to do this, I got to do that. That's the way it works. Paul is calling this the elementary principles. That's like the ABCs. It's a very immature view of what the law is. The law is a statement of righteousness. It's a standard of behavior that reflects perfect godly righteousness, which none of us can do. And yet somehow in our childishness, we thought what we have to do is do them. But we could never really achieve them. We could never get there. And that's the quandary he's been talking about for 2 chapters. You can never get there. However, the standard doesn't change. And when Jesus the Messiah comes on the scene, he doesn't say, look, I didn't come here to soften the law, to soften the standard. The standard is the standard. Not one jot or tittle is going to go away. That law, that standard of righteous behavior is fixed. Not changing it. However, I did come to fulfill it, which means he's the only person who actually could do it perfectly. So you have to go back and look at that. The elementary principle in our childishness before Christ was to think that if there's a standard of behavior, I guess that means I can achieve it. But we can't. But still the standard is the standard. And for those who want to be part of that promise to Abraham, that is, I will be your God, you will be my people, the standard for the people is perfect righteousness of God. And none of us can achieve that. However, and we've looked at this the last couple of weeks, it has been achieved for us in what Christ has done for us. So go back and look at the previous verses. So what he's saying is, you were a child and you used to deal with the world in childish ways. Well, your dealing with the law was dealing with the law in childish ways. You never understood it. You weren't wise enough to understand what the law was meant to do. It was meant to bring you to Christ. It wasn't meant to make you trust in yourself. So you were enslaved. You were enslaved to what the law said. You were enslaved to trying to make yourself good enough that God would accept you. And that doesn't work. That's an immature view of the law. So he says, in the same way, when we were children, we had a childish kind of view of the elementary principles of the law. The law was not a means to righteousness. The law was a wake-up call that we were not righteous and needed another solution in Christ. That's the mature view. Okay, so he goes on in 4. We're still in a family situation. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, which is his way of underscoring Jesus was a human being, born of a woman. There's a lot of false philosophies that go around that dispute who Jesus was. Even in the first several centuries of Christianity, they disputed who Jesus was. And many of them said, well, he wasn't really a human being. He was kind of a spirit creature that looked like a human being, but he wasn't a human being. But when Paul says he's born of a woman, he's a human being, fully God and fully man. And also, not only just a full human being, but a human being born under the law, that is, born under the standard of righteousness that you needed to surpass, or else you're not going to be in heaven. You're not going to be part of the people of God. He was born under that as well, as a Jew. So why was he born? Okay, here's your one test for the morning. Verse 5, he was born to redeem, that's a purchase word, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we finish the line. So that we, what? Read the line there. Jesus was born to redeem those who were under the law, so that we could gain righteousness. Maybe, yeah, that's not a bad stab. So that we could live forever. That's a good, yeah, I would do that. So that we can be saved. Yeah, I go for that. Yeah. So we could be inheritors. Yeah, I like that too. Yeah. You can look at your Bible through it. So we can become children. Well, that's the theme right now. So that's where we're going. So this is a really surprising statement. Look what he says. So that we might receive adoption as sons. Which means you weren't sons to start with. But he adopted you. This is why we're tying in little orphan Annie. See, here's the surprising statement. He's saying, you don't meet the standards. The Jews didn't meet the standards of righteousness to be the people of God. Nobody met the standards except Jesus himself, the Son who came, the real Son of the family, the Son who came. No one meets the standards. However, because of what Jesus did, you and I, who do not meet the standard of righteousness, who are not children of God, become children of God through adoption. He chooses us. He chooses us, the little street urchins on the street, like Harold Gray, who was looking for a good comic idea, sees this little gal, Annie, and then God sees us, loves us, pulls us off the street, adopts us into his family. Now, as you're becoming part of the family, even though it's by adoption, now, as a family member, you're an heir to the promises of God. So a remarkable change has happened. In the same way, you think about little orphan Annie. She gets adopted by Mrs. Warwick, who really kind of has second thoughts about it, but Oliver Warwick, that's his real name, Daddy Warwick, he wants her to call him. It completely transforms her life. She comes off the street, she comes off the orphanage, she comes out from under Miss Asthma, right? She comes out from under that and then finds life. She finds real life by the choice of the Daddy Warbecks, right? So this is the interesting parallel that's coming up. What Christ has done has allowed us to be adopted. And because you are sons, and God has sent his Spirit of his Son into our hearts, we cry, Abba, Father. Anytime you see in Hebrew, Abi, Ab, you think Father. Abraham, Ab, Father. So it turns out that what Jesus is trying to tell us through Paul's writing here is the fact that you've been adopted. Okay, I get that. I wasn't a child. He elected to adopt me into his family. Now I'm an heir, and I thought he was going to talk about what I'm heir to. Well, you know what you're heir to as being a privileged, adopted member, but real member of the family? You know what you're heir to? The nearness of the Father. Presence with God. So that you get to a point where suddenly God's not a distant law kind of nasty guy who condemns, although he is a judge and he's very just. But now you as a member of the family have inherited a nearness to God himself. So what Paul's saying right here is your treasure is your ability to look to God and say, Abba, Father. Now, this whole theme comes throughout the Old Testament as well. The treasures that we have in life, we know, are largely relational. At the end of your life, you're not going to say, boy, I wish I'd made more money, or I wish I'd spent more time at the office, or I'm glad that I had a pool at the back of my house, or all those things are kind of fun, but they're not anything. But it turns out that relationships have an enduring value, and we know this. The people that we miss, that die, this enduring value doesn't seem to go away. It seems to linger forever. You almost grieve for the rest of your life for people that you love, and that's okay. That's okay. Relationships have enduring value. They are the treasures. And God teaches us through human relationships that that's the real treasures we're doing. And special relationships even more so are treasures. Parents and children, husbands and wives. I mean, all of these things, grandparents and grandchildren. I mean, these are really extraordinary things. And so your treasure coming into the family of God, being adopted, is the treasure of a nearness to the Father. The writer of one of the Psalms says, the nearness of God is my good. It's the nearness to God. So what he's saying is that for the Gentiles and the Jews alike, when you make this transition, understanding the new covenant, understanding that this Father isn't the one who says, do this line and live, although that's exactly what he says, he understands that that's an impossible line for you. And yet he still loves you. He still knows that you're a street urchin needing adoption on the street. He knows what you're like. He's set a line, says you can't be part of my family unless you're like Daddy Warbucks. You got to be like Daddy Warbucks to be in Daddy Warbucks' family. And interestingly enough, as you read the comic strip, she becomes more and more like him in terms of her drive and her sense of injustice. I mean, it's really great. But God says, I'm sorry, my standard's very high, but I still want you to be in my family. I've come up with a solution. My son comes in the flesh, under the law. He dies, fully perfect, and he dies for you. And now, if you put your trust in what he's done for you, then you are qualified to be in my family. And you have access to the Father like never before. Access to the Father is the true blessing in the entire Bible. You start in the Garden of Eden, and there's Adam and Eve enjoying this great place, and enjoying this great place with God who walked in the cool of the day amongst them. God's intention in the Garden of Eden wasn't to wow them with the trees and the fruit and the loveliness of it. It was to wow them with who he was, right? And so when they sin, when they decide they're going to go against what this guy said, this creator guy said, then that relationship is broken with God. Then you go through the entire history of the Bible, and the end is to restore that relationship with God. And then when you get to Revelation, it looks as though we're back in the garden again, in relationship with God. So the entire story of mankind, the entire story of what God has done as a creator, has been to bring us into relationship with himself. So that's why Paul says, when you get to this point where you've understood this, when you've come out of the childhood understanding of the law is still the law, but a mature understanding is realizing and accepting the fact that you cannot achieve it sufficiently to become a child of God. It's impossible. However, through Christ, you can be adopted into the family and have a nearness to God. The nearness to God issue is also characteristic in so many things in the Old Testament and New. Probably the most characteristic one in the New about relationship with God himself is when Jesus is crucified. It turns out that many things happen. There was a big earthquake, remember that, when Jesus dies in the afternoon? And then something happens at the temple. Do you remember what happens at the temple? Yeah, the veil, this big, fat, thick curtain that keeps humanity out of the Holy of Holies, where God decides to make his presence known inside there. That separates man. Only certain people come through that veil every year. Once a year, the high priest for atonement comes through that, but no one else can, because you cannot approach God and live. But at the crucifixion, that curtain is ripped open. And it's suddenly a highway into the Holy of Holies. And interestingly enough, every commentator who talks about it, who writes this down, says, look, it wasn't just ripped, or it wasn't just slightly parted, because it was actually two halves you could part. It was actually ripped from the top to the bottom. Like taking a sheet of paper and ripping it from the top to the bottom, not from the bottom to the top. And why is that important? It seems as though symbolically it was ripped apart from heaven. So when Christ dies and he's resurrected, the promise of access into the presence of God is made present in that symbolic ripping of the temple. Access to God is there. So the treasure of the entire Bible, the blessing of the entire Bible, isn't life in a painless heaven with golden streets. It's relationship with God, where we come to him and cry, Abba, Father. Now, I'll take a break right here and say, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if for many Christians, Christianity is seems like a list of things I got to do. It seems like a law, like the law we keep talking about. There's a standard behavior you got to toe your line to, and something good happens in my life if I do those things. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. But the real draw to Christianity is the fact that here's a loving God who John says God is love, who wants to restore relationship with you, but in your sin, mankind has not frequently, universally stiff-armed God and say, I don't want any part of who you are. But in the Bible's message, when you discover that God is offering you life in him, I mean like real life, not just sort of life, then I was going to say magical. I'll say that magical things happen in that relationship. It's an astonishingly satisfying and surprising relationship. And if you're saying, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about, the easiest solution is for you to come to God in prayer and say, God, I want to know you like that. I do want to know you like that, and I don't know how to do that. And yet that's the promise in salvation, isn't golden streets in heaven. The promise is nearness to God, which is a wonderful thing, because relationships is where the treasure is. Ask God, and he'll change that for you. I mean, if you honestly just say, God, I want to know you like that. Now, I got to put a caveat on that. If you want to know God like that, in Old Testament examples of the narratives, people came to their most intimate understandings of who God was during the hardest times in their life. So, if you want to know God like that, you may be asking for times like that. And it's true. I mean, for me as well, I'm a really old guy, and when I look back on that timeline of my life, I look at the really difficult times, I go, yeah, well, I don't want to ever do that ever again. But wow, what happened as a result of that in my relationship with God is priceless, So it's worth all that. Abba, Father is a very intimate way of coming to him and loving him. One of my favorite Psalms talks about, and it's the shortest Psalm, in fact. I think it's 131. Yes, 131. It talks about this whole picture of Israel and Abba, Father, and it does it in the imagery of a mother, not a father, but a mother. And what it says in Psalm 131, read it sometime. It's very short. Basically says, I have weaned my heart like a weaned child comes to its mother. I've settled myself like a weaned child comes to its mother. And it's such an arresting phrase, because first off, it's a wonderful picture. I mean, we know the relationship between a nursing child and a mother, right? I mean, it's an extraordinarily warm, really hard to express, beautiful image, right? But what he says in this psalm is that he has settled his heart like a weaned child. Well, a weaned child is a child who no longer comes to his mother for food. But it's still a child who loves being the presence of the mother. Not because of sustenance or immediate needs or for a tummy that's rumbling, but because they simply enjoy the nearness. See, that's what's so arresting about that. And that's what he's getting at here. The treasure in our life are relationships. The supreme treasure is relationship with God. And in Psalm 131, it's like a child who comes to God not because of needs, but because they just want to be with God. My soul is like a weaned child within me, without a care for needs, but with a delight in the presence of God. Okay, so that's what he's getting at here. This is what we've inherited, is God himself. So, you're no longer a slave, amen, a slave to sin, but a son. And if a son, well, then an heir through God. You're a child in the family of God, and hence everything of the treasures of who God is and what he wants for you are now coming to you. Blessings, which God withheld from people who didn't get over the bar of the law. However, Christ has done that for us. It's an astonishing thing. You've been adopted in the family of God, not on the basis of anything really great about you, not on the basis of you self-improving yourself to the point where God says, well, finally you can be part of my family because you're not as bad as you used to be. No, has nothing to do with that at all. You are part of God's family because you believe what Christ has done on your behalf. You put your faith and trust in that, and now it's counted to you as righteousness. Genesis 15, like Abraham, counted to you as righteousness. So when God sees you, he sees the righteousness of Christ, not you. It's an astonishing thing. And so now you're an heir of all that. The privilege is like an orphan on the street, wondering, when will I ever be adopted? Will anyone ever consider me worthy of being adopted? How good do I have to make myself until someone comes to me and says, I want to adopt that one? And so you work and you work and you try and do good things, and you just wonder whether you have any worth to anybody. Well, that's your position now as an adopted child into the family of God. And he's the one who paid the price, redeemed. He's the one that took the initiative. All you had to do was say, okay, I trust. I'm yours. We are heirs of that promise that started 4,000 years ago with Abraham. God saying, I'll be your God. You'll be my people. Do you want to be part of that or not? Okay, verse 8. So formerly, when you did not know God, see, we're still back to knowing God. Formerly, when you did not know God, or he corrects himself and says, or, better said, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those things by nature that are not God's. Well, it was sin, actually. You were enslaved to sin. Jesus said, we said last week before, if you sin, you're a slave to sin. If you try and achieve righteousness in the law, you're still going to fail, so you're a slave to it. So in a real sense, the law kind of traps you in the jail of self-performance, and you can't get over the bar even if you beat yourself up in self-performance. That's the enslavement. Those things aren't God's, but you've enslaved yourself to that. That's an immature view of the law. But now that you've come to know God, or rather be known by God, well, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world whose slaves you want to be once more? So look, you've been adopted into a family, and now you're going to go back trying to earn God's favor. Does that make any sense to you? See, that does not make any sense. You've been adopted into the family. It's signed on the line. You're adopted. You're done. And yet you go back trying to impress God with your righteousness by trying to perform the law enough that you look like you're righteous enough to qualify to be in God's family. That's why this doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make sense. And you become slaves to trying to please the law. He says, this is what you're doing. You observe days and months and seasons and years. This is a very Jewish thing, but we sort of do this as well. And what he's saying is that you're observing these things like they're special, like they're sacred. You're separating the sacred world and the secular world. You're taking these things and you're actually giving them two different marks. Some of these things you do are sacred. They're for God. Some of these things are for me. And so you're chopping your experience into two different things. Like, you observe days. Like what? Like the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is sacred, right? But what about the other 6 days of the week? Are they not sacred? Oh, no, I can do whatever I want during those. You can see you're skating in the wrong direction. How about months? They would wait for the next month to start. They would wait until the new moon happened. All months started on a new moon. New moons were really kind of exciting because you would wait. You go out at night, the moon's not always in the sky. At a new moon, the moon is actually over where the sun is, so you're not going to see it at night. But eventually the moon moves past where the sun is relative to where we are. And one evening, as the sun's going down and the sky just starts to darken and it's deep bluish purple, suddenly you'll see this little fractional sliver of a moon, just a tiny wispy little moon. That's a new moon. And so they'd wait for that to show up. They'd say, it's a new month, woohoo! Well, new months, things happened. And so they would look at those things and they'd say, well, new moons are kind of sacred. And, that first week, the first day of that first month, it's a wonderful thing. Okay, that's great for the beginning of the month, but what about the other weeks in the month? Are they yours? The new moon is one thing and it's sacred because that's how God's calendar goes. But so you see there's this separating of the sacred and the secular, which is really It's a bad way to look at things. Or seasons. Seasons. They would have all these feasts of Israel, the 7 appointed feasts of Israel from Leviticus 23, and 2 more which they do as well. They would do these feasts, and they'd wait for the seasons to come. And the seasons would come. Then we'd do these feasts. There were 3 of the 7 you had to go to Jerusalem for and celebrate. They were big deals. So the feasts were sacred things. But what about all the rest of the seasons of the year? They're just kind of normal, kind of boring, kind of ordinary, very secular. During the feast, you got to do what God wants you to do. During the secular, you can do what you want to do. And then years. There was a special year that happened every 7th year. Amazing things happened. Loans got completely forgiven. And in some cases, slaves were released. What? Yeah. 7th years, they're very sacred. They're just really sacred. In fact, one of the most sacred parts of the 7 years, which Israel, it looks like, never did, was you were never supposed to plant on the 7th year. You were supposed to trust that if you did not plant crops this year, hence you won't get a harvest next year, that your family will not starve the next year. God said you need to take a Sabbath year every 7 years. Don't plant fields. You'll be okay. And they went, oh, I don't think so. So they never did it. It's one of the reasons why they went into captivity to Babylon, because they didn't do it. So what about years 1 through 6? Are those mine? So there's this weird kind of separation, and Paul's getting at this, is that you separate your experience into the sacred, the godly part, and the secular, the ungodly part. When in fact, your entire existence, 24/7, is a sacred place with God, relationship with God, Abba, Father. You messed that up. One of my favorite Bible commentators, Barclay, wrote this. He says it's kind of like shutting up God to special days only. And that's a legalistic kind of frame of mind. That's what he's saying is wrong. You tend to see the world as either something for God or something for me, when actually you can't shut up God to the special days only. God's a part of your entire existence. That's a mature, not a childlike understanding of what God has in store for you. Okay? So don't do that. Now, I'll just put a caveat on this. Especially, feasts are a good thing to talk about. The feasts are not a bad thing to participate in. In fact, God instituted them because it reminded Israel of some really important things. And I think the feasts actually are a map of the history of all mankind to the end of the universe. But we got to talk about that another time. So they're really instructive in wonderful ways. I mean, really joyous, wonderful ways. So I'm not putting those things down. But they thought that by doing these things, they were earning something by participating in them. If you think you're earning something in terms of God's favor with you, that's where your mindset has screwed up. So I'm not saying don't do these things. Sabbath is another really good one. Are we compelled by the law to do the Sabbath? No, if you feel compelled because of the law, you feel you ought to do it because of the law, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Can I still take a day off in the week and call it a Sabbath where I separate it to be with God? Sure. And I think that's healthy, and I think we should. But not to impress God, but to enjoy the blessing of who God is. So there's we have to explain this more carefully. I'm not putting down all these things. God asked us to do these, but he didn't ask us to do these that in doing them we impress him. That's what's different. That's what's different. Okay, he goes on in verse 11. This is as far as we'll go today. I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Oy vey, what am I doing? Why am I wasting my time on you? Right? This is where Paul gets to. He's just despairing about this entire thing. Look, you don't you get the fact you've been adopted into the family of God, especially you Gentiles? I mean, don't you get that this is a really big deal? And that in being adopted in the family of God, you have access to God and the blessings of the treasure of knowing God and who he is? Don't you get that that's a really big deal? Then why are you continuing to try and impress God with what you can perform at? What are you doing? This is craziness. God's adopted you. You can stop working at being worthwhile to be adopted. That's all he's saying. And we can identify with this. We get this. So let's let little orphan Annie help us interpret this. So we go back to little orphan Annie while she was still in the orphanage. While she's still in the orphanage, and by the way, in the comic strip, you got to go back to 1924 to find when she's in this situation. Pre-adoption with the Warbucks. She is in a situation during the first year of the comic strip where she's despairing that she will ever gain the attention of anyone to adopt her. She feels worthless. She feels unadoptable. The people in the orphanage, even bad talk who Annie is because, well, by the way, you don't want that one. It's like when you go to adopt a cat at the shelter. This one's lovely. This one's lovely. You don't want that one. This one fights and claws, and it's nasty. And well, this one's okay. And this one's okay. That's what they were doing to Annie while she was in the orphanage. And so Gray paints this wonderful picture about the fact that she's just despairing and wonders if she really is adoptable. So she tries to toe the line by doing all the rules at the orphanage, working her heart out, trying to do all the things where they contribute to the life in the orphanage, and still yet she feels like she's failing all the time. She just cannot meet the standard of adoptability. And while she's there, she's tormented by all the other kids there who feel like they are more attractive to the adoptive prospective parents. And so they're all going to get adopted. And so when they do get adopted, they stick their tongue out at Annie as they're going out the door with their new parents. And Annie feels smaller and smaller. There's bullies in the orphanage who continue to bully her, which gives her this spine to become kind of a scrappy little gal who does stuff. She could, do her own stuff. And that scrappiness, that pluckiness is what makes for the series to get even better as years go on. But she despairs that she even is going to be adoptable. And that's kind of where we're at before we understand what Christ has done for us. Twisted Christianity, or what Paul calls childish view of Christianity, is the idea that somehow you have to perform enough so that God will say, finally, you're adoptable. But you'll never get there. The law says you'll never get there. You can't do enough because God's standard is impossibly high. Will the Father, will the God of the universe, will the Creator ever see me as someone who's adoptable into his family? And Paul says, yes, but on the basis of what Christ has done, not on the basis of what you have done. Or God says, on the basis of what I have done and my initiative, I bring you into my family. You don't do it yourself. So let me give you a last couple slides this came 2 months after the one you saw. It's still a very early one. And you'll hear what I'm saying. You'll see Galatians pop as we do these four slides. So here's Miss Asthma. Now, Annie, you probably can't read this, so I'll read it up here. Now, Annie, if these people who are coming to the home tomorrow should adopt you, I hope you'll always remember what a lot we've done for you here. You have been sheltered, clothed, fed since you were a baby entirely by charity. You should be very grateful. And she says, yes'm, Miss Asthma, yes'm. And now she's doing her chores at the orphanage. These words just cut to me. When she keeps reminding me I'm an orphan and that I'm a charity girl, it makes me hate her and hate the home and hate myself too for being so poor. Gee, I wish some nice folks would adopt me, and then I could have a real papa and mama like other kids. She's working her tail off to be adoptable. Now then, maybe I could have 2 dresses, and there wouldn't always be dishes to wash and scrubbing and mending. But I wouldn't mind working hard every minute if only they weren't always telling me that I'm an orphan. And lastly, this picture, praying before she goes to bed. And please, God, make me a real good little girl so some nice people will adopt me. Then I can have a papa and a mama to love. And if it's not too much trouble, I'd like a dolly too. Doesn't it just tug at your heart? God, make me adoptable. Make me adoptable. Make it so that someone will love me in a genuine sense. And I'd like a dolly. I'd just like to have life. A couple of dresses and a dolly. I want life. And where I am, scrubbing the floors, doing the dishes, all the chores that I have here, the mean and bully people that I live with, this isn't life. I want life in a family. I want life in a family. However, what's different about her prayer, she says, God, make me adoptable, change me. And God, if he was in the upper bubble in this picture right here, would say, you're already adoptable. I love you tremendously. You don't understand. You have worth far beyond what everyone else is saying. You don't have to prove it. You're already mine. And see, that's the word that's coming to us that Paul's trying to say. Look, you've been adopted beyond all measure. You've been adopted into the family of God. You have now, as a resource and as an advocate and as a father in heaven who's 1,000,000 times better than Daddy Warbucks. He's got resources that Daddy Warbucks doesn't have. He has nearness that Daddy Warbucks doesn't have. He has a home that Daddy Warbucks has. You are the winner of the cosmic, eternal lottery. And it had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with God. It had everything to do with what God did on your behalf. So if that's the case, if you are like little orphan Annie, someone who is amazed by the fact that they were adoptable enough that Daddy and Mrs. Warbucks brought them into their family, if you realize that was between you and God, then what are you doing trying to impress him by your performance? What are you doing? The adoption papers were signed and you're in. Now, I want you to go back, though. Many times we talk about the conflict between faith and works. There's a beautiful thing she says. Let me go back. Right there. Maybe I could have 2 dresses. There wouldn't always be dishes to wash, scrubbing and mending. But I wouldn't mind working hard every minute if they weren't always telling me that I'm an orphan. And this is also our experience in the Christian life. Once you come to relationship with God himself, come to understand the kind of father that he is, it doesn't mean that you stop working. It means that now you start engaging and doing things for a completely different reason. Not to impress the master of the house, but because something about who this master is, who this father is, it just inspires you to do even that much more. And why? Because I'm so impressed with the nature of who God is. God is love. Somehow that bubbles up inside of me, and as his child, as an adopted child, I want to do the same thing. You work, and even more so because of your love for the Father. Not because you're trying to impress the Father. 2 different things. The works are the same often, but the motivations are different, and that's what separates doing it from a child's perspective or a mature perspective. I wouldn't mind doing all the work if they just wouldn't keep telling me that I'm loved, that I'm not part of it. I don't belong anywhere. What she's saying is, I want to stop working trying to belong someplace. If I belong someplace, I don't mind doing the work. Just don't tell me I'm unlovable anymore. That to me is a remarkable picture. And so this is the Christian life. I mean, Annie got it right. She got it right. And one day her dreams came true. And Mrs. Warbucks came in and adopted her, almost against her will. But Daddy Warbucks fell in love with her and became like a father that she never had to him. He had infinite resources. And so she became more like him as the comic strip went on, because she was so impressed, not only with the graciousness of Daddy Warbucks, but his boldness, his initiative against injustice. He always wanted to make the world right. And she took on those characteristics so that in a very short time in the comic strip, actually within about 2 years, she looked like a miniature 10-year-old redheaded Daddy Warbucks. Really, it's just astonishing. And that's what happens to us. The longer that we are children of the Father in heaven, who is love, we start to look more and more like him. Partially because we admire what we discover about him, but partially because he's building in us, through the Spirit of Christ in us, the ability to reflect who he is, because we're starting to look, this is what we call sanctification, we're starting to look every single day on a behavioral level, we're starting to look more and more like God. Doing things he would do if he was in our shoes, loving people the way he loves people who's in our shoes, because literally he is in our shoes, he's in us. And then as a result, we start communicating the love of God, of this Father who has this offer to all mankind. Would you like to be part of my family? And when people catch that and understand, like little orphan Annie, that there's no way they can earn their way in, and they yield to him, and they accept the promise of the gift of his son, you're in the family. And you start looking like him, you start smelling like him. You don't smell like miasma. You smell like a fragrance to life. That's what Paul says in his Corinthian letter. So as the story goes on, it's more a story of the relationship between Annie and Daddy Warbucks. It's not a story about leaving an orphanage into a very rich house. It's that relationship. And that's exactly the same. I mean, this is highlighted just in the passage we read. Because your sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. That's what the true Christian life is about. It's about nearness and the enjoyment in the presence of God and who he is. It's that, right there. Although God doesn't have a bald head. Well, he does. I don't know. Does he have hair? I don't know. Does he have a head? Okay, that's too much theology for the day. But look at these as well. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, huh? That we should be called children of God. And we are. We are. You've been adopted, but that doesn't make you any less a child of God. You're a child of his. And look at what Romans 8 says. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. That's the Christian life, living as a child of God, living in a relationship with God himself. That's the big thing. And John even starts his gospel by saying it this way. And it's very familiar words to you, but listen to the Son's issue. The true light which gives light to everyone was coming into the world. Talking about Jesus. He was in the world, yeah, and the world was made through him. Yeah, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own. We're talking about the Jews. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, that's believing in the fullest nature of who he is, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, not of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, not born in a normal way like that, but of God. Born of God. You're a child of the Creator of the universe, who went to great pains to bring you to himself. And the delight in our hearts has to be the same, but 1,000 times bigger, as the delight in the little fictional character of little orphan Annie, who when she got adopted, the world changed. And it did. And that's your situation with your Father. The world changed. And now you have nearness to God. The veil's been rent asunder. You have full approach into his presence. And you can enjoy God forever. That's the Christian life. It's not towing the line. So the next time you say, I need to do such and such, I need to do such and such because I ought to, because it's expected of me, you need to kind of step on that and say, no, I do this because I love God, because I love seeing this as who God is, as who Jesus is. I want this part of my life as well. Yeah, I love this. I love loving the unlovable because God loved the unlovable. It's a whole different reason to live life. And like little orphan Annie said, I'll do this and more if you just stopped saying that I don't belong. But now we belong. We belong to him. And that gives us even more animation in what we do, because we're excited about who he is. We call this perfecting yourselves to death, and I always think of little orphan Annie scrubbing floors. And Christians who don't have a real understanding of what the life of Christ is for us, now that we've come to him in salvation, are still scrubbing floors, trying to impress God, trying to earn his favor. And in the end, if that's what you put your trust in at the end of the age, you'll lose. You're perfecting yourself at great expense to death. I think out of all the things I think about for those who don't know God, I think about this very thing where they spend an entire lifetime very sacrificially doing a lot of good things because they know someone's keeping track someplace. Someone's keeping marks. It's like the Santa list, you know? Doing good things, doing bad things, checking his list twice. Is God doing that with me? And they're just knocking themselves out in their entire lifetimes, trying to do enough good to counteract the bad that they know is very much a part of what their heart's all about. And then at judgment, they'll realize that all that elbow grease, all that effort, all those scrubbed floors for Jesus didn't earn them a thing. And God will say, well, a la Matthew 7, I never knew you. I never knew you. Because the mark of a true believer is someone who's discovered and delights in knowing God, not in scrubbing floors for Jesus. Let's quit. What do you say? Why don't we stand? We don't have a closing song. Why don't we just stand and I'll close us in prayer as we finish today. Father, how frequently forget about the fact of the great amazing truth of that you have adopted us into your family. And Lord, I pray you'd forgive us for those times where we let that understanding and let that wonder grow cold and pushed to the back burners of our thinking. And I pray that you would impress upon us again, not only the cost of this redemption that brings us into your presence, but that we've not but just been saved from your wrath and judgment, but we have been saved to intimate relationship with you starting now. Starting now. And God, for those of us who just, I can't relate in exactly what that means, we can at least relate to this. We understand some of the warmest relationships we've had in our lives. So some of the deeply treasured moments we've had with people that we love tremendously. And God, we want to have that with you. We want to have that with you. We want to know you more deeply, more fully. We want our hearts to leap as we think about the fact that I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes in prayer just being with you and loving who you are and having who you are become impressed upon me in so many ways that you provide for me, you love for me, and you communicate your nature to us in your word. Father, we want to know you like that. So we are hungry, Lord. We are all hungry for that. Some of us are further down that road than others. Some of us are just starting. But we all of us, have come to understand and continue to hunger for the nearness of God, because that's our good. That is our good. So Lord, we pray you would bring us into your presence. Bring us past that veil that's been rent on the outside. Bring us into your very presence, that our hearts might delight in who you are. Because we already know we belong to you. We've been adopted by you. And now we're yours. So thank you for all this now in Jesus' name. Amen.